before the fight, Dana White kind of flipped out on the San Francisco Chronicle, which is one of the great papers out there, and it would be great to have coverage in a paper with that much of a circulation, but they did not want to cover the event.
Yeah. And, one of the things we're finding is that newspapers are kind of like the last bastion. And, I think this is something that newspaper sports editors have to really consider because, they're in a tough marketplace right now. You on the Internet, so much information is available so quickly. And if you want to attract new, younger readers, you have to cover what the new, younger readers are interested in. I don't understand what the Chronicle was thinking. Basically they said, we're not going to cover the UFC ever. It was a mistake. Their readership is definitely into that. I can guarantee you that. And, it's a mistake they made. But I think it's been a process. And one of the reasons that I think that the UFC's future and the sport of MMA's future, not just the UFC, but the entire sport of MMA has a very bright future is because we've gotten to this point in MMA without mainstream media largely. We don't have any of the major New York papers covering MMA regularly. We don't have any of the major San Francisco papers covering it regularly. We don't have the Chicago papers covering it regularly. You think of the major papers in the country, and a lot of them just don't send writers. They don't, if the fight is in their town, they might write a column or two. They might cover the show, but they don't cover it as a beat. And I think that's where they have to start coming up and stepping up. And once that starts to happen, I think MMA is going to become a more mainstream sport. It's not mainstream yet, even though it's very popular, and I think it's exceeded boxing in a number of ways, but it's still not mainstream yet. I cover both boxing and MMA, and I can tell you when I go to a big boxing event and I see the New York Times and the New York Daily News and the New York Post and the Boston Globe and the Chicago Tribune and, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, they're all there. You go to an MMA and I'm seeing MMA websites and one or two newspapers. That is going to be the next level for MMA to get to. And when that happens, I think that's going to really explode and you're going to get a lot more fans to the sport, and I think it's going to really help the sport a great deal.
Where does it really lie in terms of the blame on the newspaper side? Do the writers need to drum up the interest with their editors, or are the editors just stuck in their old ways? Because a lot of the writers, and a lot of the writers kind of feel the same way. You've got a lot of the writers who are, in your age group, a little older than me, who every time you go out to a boxing match, they want to bust your chops, bust my chops, and say, MMA. But does it really lie with the editors?
I think it's a little bit of both, but I think, it's a demographic thing. I started covering MMA, and, when I first started covering it, I was into all sorts of fights, but I didn't know MMA that well at the beginning 10 years ago, more than 10 years ago now. And it was a process of me learning it. But I realized early on, I said, hey, this is going to be a big sport. People are interested in this. I never envisioned it getting to where it is right now. I'd be lying if I said that. But I knew that, hey, there was a good, solid audience for this, that people wanted to see it. And I think, as time goes on, more people are going to make that realization. I think that as younger people get into management at these papers and they start looking at, okay, how are we going to, bring back some of our readership, this is going to be one area that they do it. And you look at it now, all the major websites, are covering MMA, Yahoo, we're the world's largest sports website. We have a great staff of people that are devoted to MMA. ESPN is now devoting a lot of resources. You see Fox. It's really stepping up. And, some of the smaller websites are doing very well financially, MMA websites, because they're devoting a lot of resources to it. The advertisers are supporting it. So I think it's only a matter of time. Unfortunately, the newspaper industry, I think, is dominated by older people who are out of the demographic of MMA.
That said, so I mentioned the tweet that Dana White sent out. It was kind of F-bomb laden. Is there a better way to go about it, or does it matter? Are these guys, will they be convinced by the sweet approach from Dana White?
No, I don't think that. There's some that might be, but I don't like this. The Chronicle, based on what I've heard happen, I wasn't there, so just taking the UFC side of it, because that's the only side I know about. But I just think there's some people you're not going to convince now, and I think time will eventually convince them. As these fights go on. Here's the thing, Steve. A lot of people think the fights are brutal because, there's blood on the forehead sometimes when you get elbowed or cut, and there's a lot of blood, and people, oh, it's brutal. Mm-hmm. It's far safer than boxing, far safer than boxing. You don't have the traumatic brain injuries that you have in boxing. You don't even have the other injuries that boxers tend to get. So it's a safer sport, as that's proven over a much longer period of time. I think, that'll get attention from people as well. And I just think, is that the younger demographic that's now an MMA fans and are conversant with MMA, is they have children. Those children grow up, and MMA is, it's just like computers. When computers came out 25, 30 years ago, and you got a computer, and not everybody had one. They didn't know how to work them. You didn't know what it was. It was a tough thing. As they've gotten more mainstream now, everybody's conversing with it. There's still some people that aren't real technophiles, but you know what? The kids get a computer. It's part of their daily lives, and I think that's going to be the same way with MMA. As we get to that next generation, it's just going to become more normal to them. It's going to be part of their lives growing up. It's a sport that's been out there for all of their lives, and I think they'll accept it.
And we should say there's positives to all this as well, though, because you're doing a lot of sports radio interviews today. I do the afternoon drive show here in Vegas on the ESPN affiliate, and I think sports radio is starting to pick up on it a lot quicker than the newspapers. And let me tell you something. I see shots all the time at sports radio. Sports radio has actually never been bigger from a rating standpoint, and it is the demo you want to grab because it's getting younger and younger. So you've been all over the place today, and I think part of that was the fact that the spoken word from Chael Sonnen and the video of the pre-fight stuff really hooked a lot of people, a lot of casual fans.
Yeah. No, I think that's absolutely right. I mean, Chael went out there, and, this wasn't a guy that could barely speak, it was slurring his words. I mean, this was an articulate, intelligent guy who spoke very well, who presented a good case for himself. I mean, he got a little over the top toward the end, but it was all choreographed and all planned. He knew exactly what he was doing. Even in the deal with Larry Pepe and going on the Jim Rome show and denying it, he knew exactly what he was doing. There was no doubt about what was going on there, Steve. So I think that got a lot of people interested, saying, what's going on here? When they put Chael on their show, they were surprised how, well he spoke and how quickly he was able to answer their questions, and he had lines for every occasion, and but then he performed, and the fight was dramatic, and then Anderson performed, and I think that caught people's attention, and I think that's only going to help the sport. This fight is going to be another one of those moments where I kind of like Forrest Griffin, Stephan Bonner, that kind of put a stake in the ground and said, okay, MMA has arrived to a certain degree, and this is going to be another one of those stakes along the path toward mainstream acceptance.
Before the fight, I was talking about the effect that Sonnen would have on the fight. I was quoted in one story that was up on the web, and I said, hey, this card basically, because his Chael got pushed from probably the average Silva fight, maybe 500,000 pay-per-view buys. I predicted about 700
or less.
How much? I said 700. How much impact do you think that Chael and all the media work will have in the end?
I think it's going to be really big. I was thinking, based on what I was seeing yesterday on traffic and things like that, I think they're going to get close to 900,000. I mean, I don't know, and the UFC is reticent to release that figure, so a lot of times we don't know. I have to make some educated guesses a lot of times, but I think they're going to get in that 850, 900,000 range, because I just think it's one of those fights that got so much hype, so much publicity. People were talking about it, and the average person, I think that take the MMA community who would buy fights. I don't, obviously not everybody buys. They had a group of people saying, we want to see Chael get destroyed and pay for all this talk. Then you had some people that were rooting for him because they were tired of Anderson Silva and what he was doing. So I think the MMA community bought the fight in a bigger number than they normally do. And then I think you had the non-MMA community, which, I think represents a very small portion of the overall average MMA UFC buy. In this case, stepped up and gave a bigger performance. And I think that's going to help get it, not to 1 million, but, in that range where you're saying, wow.
All right, Kev. Good job. We'll talk to you.
Thank you, Steve.